let's go around here with some camp intel, guys, to empty those notebooks and look at everything going around the country. Of course, we want to look at quarterback battles because that's always the number one thing at a lot of programs. We got a lot of blue blood programs out there trying to figure things out at quarterback. One team that really kind of struck my eye here from talking to you guys was at Notre Dame. I almost kind of assumed going into this year that CJ Carr was probably going to be the guy to take over the reins there, but maybe not necessarily the case, huh, Chris?
Yeah, that quarterback battle's gotten very interesting behind the scenes at Notre Dame. And like, Brandon, to your point, like, your assumption would have been correct. Like, Notre Dame went into this fall camp essentially assuming CJ Carr would take the reins. Like, they had such a belief in CJ Carr that they didn't really consider taking a transfer portal quarterback this cycle. And there were some like really big names out there that they could have potentially pursued had they chosen to, but they stayed pat. I mean, CJ Carr went through spring. He was in a battle with Steve Angeli, at least from the outside, and Steve Angeli transferred to Syracuse. And I think you kind of wipe your hands of it and you're done with it, right? Like, if you're a fan, like, CJ Carr is going to be the guy. But something that I think gets kind of lost in Notre Dame's discussion is Kenny Minchey, who's a now third-year player for them. He was a former four-star recruit, top 150 player. He had a really strong spring practice run for Notre Dame to the point where, like, he was running 1B along with CJ Carr, and it's part of the reason why I think Steve Angeli went to Syracuse ultimately. And Kenny Minchey has a lot of momentum in this quarterback battle right now at Notre Dame. I don't know who's going to end up being the guy ultimately. Like, this is still a very much an open and going competition, but like, Kenny Minchey has a ton of momentum on the back end of this because he's playing more consistently than CJ Carr at this point. And I mean, CJ Carr is somebody that I think from a ceiling perspective and like doesn't get talked about enough with this, an NIL perspective, like makes sense to ultimately be the guy. But like, this is not an open and shut case that CJ Carr is going to be the guy week one for Notre Dame. It is a very interesting competition.
Notre Dame, of course, the national runner-up last season, and of course, big battle there. Let's go to Ohio State. Richard, what are you hearing there? A lot of, again, assumptions that the former Alabama transfer, Julian Sayin, was going to end up being the guy, but sounds like a legit quarterback competition going on in Columbus.
Yeah, Brandon, I think where we're at is there's no separation, true separation. I do think it's a situation where Julian Sayin is probably the guy who, in my opinion, probably ends up winning out. And I think there's something of a lean there towards Julian Sayin, but it's still him and still Lincoln Kienholz, something of a neck and neck race as we get deeper into camp. Ryan Day said today he's not going to predict when we're going to make the decision, but we're getting more and more information. Not going to announce anything right now, going to let it play out. Now, a lot of times Ohio State has named a starting quarterback by right around now in camp, about that 2-week mark heading into week 3. But, you know, they have taken a quarterback battle into the season. This happened pretty recently here with Kyle McCord and Devin Brown a couple of years ago. So it's not completely, totally unheard of for Ohio State to do that. But obviously you want separation. You want some certainty to be able to name your guy, give him the lion's share of the first team reps as we get into kind of the dog days of camp and we start to pare it back a little bit and get into real true game prep, because what's coming down the road with those Texas Longhorns, you want certainty and you want to know that you've got your best 11 out there at snap one.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, to follow up on what Richard said, this has been a legit competition at Ohio State. I will say I talked to sources recently as yesterday, though, that did say that they would be, quote unquote, shocked at this point if it isn't Julian Sayin that ends up being the starter, which I don't think will surprise anybody on here. But it does seem like he has been consistently the better quarterback, the better out of the two through the early part of fall camp and scrimmage. To go back to Notre Dame real quick, and this is piggybacking off of some of what Chris said, this also has become very much a legitimate competition where there has not been a decision at this point. It had seemed almost like a foregone conclusion to a certain degree during the course of the summer, especially after Steve Angeli left, and really even going back to a certain point of the spring, that CJ Carr would ultimately end up starting. That definitely is no longer the case in terms of being a foregone conclusion. And Kenny Minchey has become a real factor in this. Am I ready to predict that Kenny Minchey is going to be the starter? I'm not there yet, but it is at the very least clear now that this is not just CJ Carr's job, and Kenny Minchey has a legit chance to maybe end up being the guy.
It's fascinating at Notre Dame. to be hearing about this right now, because I never make assumptions, as they say. Let's move over to Missouri, which might be a quiet team when we talk about getting into the playoff. You look at their schedule and you look at the players they've got coming back. You almost go, how did they not win 10 games this year? I mean, they might have the easiest schedule in the SEC this year. Quarterback Beau Pribula, who moved over from Penn State, I was really impressed with him against Wisconsin when he had to come in and kind of seal that game for them last year on the road. Chris, what are you hearing at Mizzou with Beau and his development in that system?
Well, I think this has been portrayed publicly and in some ways behind the scenes as a legitimate quarterback competition between Beau Pribula and Sam Horn, who is a 4-star recruit, who was one of the big splashes for Eli Drinkwitz early in his tenure. Somebody who plays baseball, has dealt with some injuries throughout his career, but has had a really nice fall camp for Missouri. But I think just talking to people around that program and talking to people aware of the situation, I think it's trending towards Beau Pribula likely starting for Missouri. Like, things can change. I wouldn't be shocked if both quarterbacks ultimately played week 1. That is the beauty of opening with Central Arkansas, right? Like, you can get 2 guys reps. But when you look at the overall performance in camp, and also, again, like, this is a topic that I don't think gets talked about enough in college football right now. It's the money distribution, right? Like, this is somebody in Beau Pribula, they paid 7 figures to come over from Penn State as the backup. And I think ultimately, even if things are close, and they have been close, like, you tend to lean towards the guy getting paid that much money. And at least right now, it feels like I would put it like 65, 70%. Like, it's going to be Beau Pribula right now. Like, there's a little bit of a way to go. Like, both guys could end up playing, but like, I think he has some of the momentum in Columbia right now to be QB1.
I'll say this. I've had 2 conversations about Missouri specifically within just the last couple hours. This is the epitome of neck and neck right now. So Sam Horn, who's Beau Pribula's competition for that job, has upped his game from last year and just during the course of this offseason to the point that has been the consistent message and what was verbalized during the course of those conversations today. This is neck and neck. They're splitting reps right now, both getting opportunities with first-team offense along the lines of what Chris said. I could see a scenario where this stretches into the beginning part of the year. I'm not ready to say that's going to happen, but I could see that maybe playing out like that. If I had to bet money on it right now, I do think that Beau ends up being the guy, but this has ended up being a closer competition than what I was expecting when Beau made the decision to transfer to Missouri going back to earlier this offseason.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned that. I want to bring this up real quick. We talk about quarterbacks getting a lot of money these days, and we've seen it obviously with the reports out there about Bryce Underwood at Michigan. Everybody just goes, well, he's going to have to start. They're paying him a lot of money. And you hear that across campuses around the country. At Mizzou, they're paying Beau a lot of money. So how do you think the boosters would feel who are paying that money that, oh, this is a neck and neck battle and maybe he'll end up losing this thing?
Well, I think another thing that's fascinating, especially when you have a truly open quarterback competition, which, by the way, we don't have very many of those these days because of, like you guys mentioned, the money kind of creating a situation there. But it's also, like, stylistically, some of these guys are so different. You're talking about a true running quarterback versus, more of a passing quarterback. And you kind of have to make those kind of decisions with a couple weeks to go until the season. I mean, it's obviously you can play multiple quarterbacks over the course of a year, but can you have a running quarterback transition into a pocket passing quarterback and expect the offense to run the same way? It's a really difficult dynamic that I think a lot of offensive coordinators are having to deal with right now.
I wanted to hit on Florida State here real quick. Not really a quarterback battle going on there, but I know a couple of folks down there was talking to them. What's going on with Tommy Castellanos, the transfer from Boston College, who was really dynamic at times last season and really a surprise year under Bill O'Brien, to be quite honest, especially offensively. A running quarterback, someone you think would really fit well into what Gus Malzahn, the new offensive coordinator there, likes to run. But I was told that during this first week of practice, going through their first scrimmage, that he's been incredibly inconsistent. He's been absorbing sacks a little bit more often. I did get the precautionary thing of like, well, it's not live, so we don't know how he's going to react in games, but they have not been wowed, is what one source down there told me so far. So obviously Florida State undergoing a major rebuild this season after going 2-10 and bringing in a bunch of transfers, and we'll see how that all works out.